actually have a client I have to get to. Okay, that's fine. All right, so hope everybody enjoyed their lunch. I appreciate being fed, that's always nice. So we are going to talk this afternoon about, so now we're kind of, you guys are all thinking about, oh, these kids that may be fit into this category. So now what do you do about it? So that's what we're going to talk about this afternoon. So one of the first things, kind of an underlying thing to remember, is that dyslexia is really an unexpected weakness in a sea of strengths. So these kids have many, many great strengths. And like I said, they start out being really smart. You think they're really smart until they start reading and writing. And so they're usually very smart and creative. They usually excel in many areas that do not have to do with reading, writing, or spelling. They're usually strong in areas controlled by the right side of the brain. Typically, these kids are more right-brained. They are more likely to think about the big picture instead of the little details. And so actually the statistics tell us that even though 20% of people are dyslexic, 35% of entrepreneurs have dyslexia. And so it tells you they have these really great strengths and they're able to think outside the box. They have to be able to think outside the box because, when you can't do things the way other kids can do them, you got to figure out a way around it, right? And so a lot of times that's seen as cheating, but, I asked my friend on the bus about what he read last night because I couldn't get it all read. It's not really cheating, it's surviving. It's using your resources. I used my Cliff Notes instead of reading that because I couldn't read all of that. It was too hard. Is that cheating or is it using your resources? So these kids have to find out really clever little ways to get around things and be able to be at least somewhat functional in school. And a hallmark of dyslexia is actually an unusual pattern of strengths and weaknesses. So you'll see, they might have really, really high highs, but they've got really, really low lows, and it just doesn't make any sense a lot of times to look at these kids and go, why can you do this, but you can't do this? That's a big hallmark of dyslexia. This model, and on your paper, I apologize, it's not super big, but up there, hopefully you can see it decently, is called the Sea of Strengths model of dyslexia. It was created by Dr. Sally Shaywitz, who's another one of the leading national experts in dyslexia. She's out of Yale. She emphasizes a sea of strengths of higher critical thinking and creativity surrounding the reading weakness found in children and adults who have dyslexia. All of the skills in the outside circle will continue to be strengths as long as the child is exposed to age-appropriate materials through other methods besides reading with their eyes. When they are limited to only what they can read with their eyes, the decoding weakness will cause the child not to meet his potential in other skill areas. And so that piece in the middle, if we don't address that in the right ways, it pervades every other skill, even though early on they were good at all this stuff. They were, they understand, they have great general knowledge, their vocabulary is great. The older they get, the less they read typically. And we all know that, kindergarten through second grade is learning to read. We hit third grade, it's reading to learn, right? So these kids, they don't like to read. They're bad at reading, so they typically don't. And even if they're forced to read, maybe they're on a first grade reading level, but they're in third grade, so what are they forced to read? First grade material. They're losing out on all of the general knowledge and all of the vocabulary that all the other third graders are getting. And so the older they get, the bigger that gap gets. And even though early on they were right up with their peers in all of these other areas, the older they get, the bigger the gap gets because they're not reading. So how do we fix that? These are some weaknesses seen in dyslexia. Language weaknesses, auditory processing, rapid naming, visual memory for words, reading, spelling, written expression. Other weaknesses can be handwriting, memorization, directionality, organization, time, telling, planning, and management, attention issues. We kind of talked about all of that stuff. Another thing, along with the organization, we were talking a little bit about this at lunch. A lot, not all again, but a lot of these kids are super messy. They can't organize their backpacks, they can't organize their desks, they can't organize their life, their room's a disaster, and if they don't have help doing those things, their backpack's just stuffed with papers and their desk is stuffed with papers and they have no idea where anything is. Very typical, also typical of ADD, ADHD, but another thing that's typical of dyslexia that you'll see. So what does a child with dyslexia need? They need to have dyslexia identified or at least strongly suspected. We've talked a little bit about this in the other one. Immediate and intense tutoring with an Orton-Gillingham-based system, and classroom and homework accommodations until reading, writing, and spelling skills reach grade level. So, and some accommodations may be needed throughout their educational career. So if they're in an Orton-Gillingham-based tutoring program, getting that kind of instruction and their skills are coming up, then they still need accommodations until they get their skills up to grade level, and a lot of them may need some of them for the rest of their lives. Especially one of the big ones is audiobooks, we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But if you think about, okay, we're gonna address these issues, we're gonna give them the right kind of instruction, they're gonna be much better writers and spellers, it's still gonna take them 3 to 5 times longer. It doesn't matter. They're always gonna be slow readers. They're always gonna be slow writers. So if you think about, okay, now I'm gonna go to college, well, the professor gave me 5 hours of reading tonight, but it takes me 5 times as long. So that's gonna take me 25 hours to read all of that. I don't even have 25 hours, so I'm just not gonna do it. And then they just get whatever they got in the lecture, but in college, so much of it is reading. And so what do? Audiobooks, that's what we do. So a lot of these kids will possibly use some of these accommodations forever, but we're teaching them now how to use them and what's out there, what's available. And when they don't need them at school anymore, that's fine. When they're doing well and they don't need them, some of them, may benefit from them forever. So what are accommodations? Accommodations are something the teacher does just a little differently to help some students learn. It may be a slight change in the way the information is presented, or the way it's practiced, or the way it's tested. And again, you guys all know what accommodations are. Accommodations don't hurt any of the other students. You guys should not have to change the curriculum or put in a lot of extra work. Accommodations should be very low cost or free. They should make the teacher's job easier, not harder. Accommodations are actually the best way to accomplish differentiated learning or effective teaching to different learning styles, which as teachers, that's what we're all instructed to do. This is one really great way that you can actually do this. Now, is it going to give you more work on the front end because you got to modify assignments and you got to do things differently for these kids? Yep, it is. But guess what? On the back end, parents are happy, the kid's happy, the kid's learning, the kid's successful. And so you don't have these parents in there breathing down your neck every day, or you're not driving yourself crazy going, what can I do to help the student? Because you've already done all that work on the front end. It's already done. So yes, it's more work on the front end, and trust me, I know teachers are massively overworked and massively underpaid. Even as a speech pathologist in the schools, I felt that. I mean, we had caseloads of 80 to 100 kids. And there's not enough time in the day to do what you need to do for all of these kids. However, hopefully, I'm going to give you some ideas today that are, don't take a lot of time or a lot of your money, because I know you guys spend a lot of your hard-earned money on materials for kids as well. That will help you make your job easier in the end, and help these kids be successful, which is the end goal. So accommodations for dyslexia, again, some simple things you can do. One is, like we did earlier with that processing demonstration, in your presentation, just slow down your speech. Talk in good phrasing, put in pauses, stop here and there to ask questions. These kids with dyslexia actually need a little bit of time to kind of chew and swallow and process that information, just like that lady was talking so fast and you couldn't process it. Just talking normally for these kids, they're behind, they're lost. So if you kind of slow down, maybe don't ask them a question, but ask one of the kids who knows the answer to a question, just to give them a little bit of time to process. For participation, don't call on students with dyslexia by surprise. They may have trouble retrieving the word, even though a lot of times they might know what it is, but anxiety makes the word retrieval problems worse. So if you just instantly call on them, like earlier when I was calling on people and you kind of looked at me like, oh no, that's how they feel, like don't call on me, it just makes them so anxious, even if they know the answer. Sometimes they don't know the answer, but even if they do, they're so anxious that they can't remember it. Anything that makes them stumble or pause or falter will be emotionally traumatizing to them. So only call on them when they volunteer, or if you must call on them, give them warning that you're going to do that and make sure they know the answer before the lesson starts. So, at the beginning of the day or whatever, call them up to your desk and say, hey, I want you to answer a question. tell me, have them answer it right there, standing in front of you. Okay, you know the answer. I'm going to call on you later, and I want you to answer that question for me. That way they know, they're prepared, they can think about it, they can still participate in class, but they're not caught off guard and caught by surprise and have the other kids making fun of them later because they didn't know the answer. So for reading aloud, let students with dyslexia tell you when they are ready to read aloud in class. Again, as we did earlier, my preference would be that you not read aloud, that you not have students read aloud. But if you must do that, then basically the ones who are struggling to read, I would not make them read. You can make it look random if you have to do it. So a good way to do this is kind of put all the kids' names in a bag and draw them out one at a time. It's just that the kids who are struggling don't go in the bag. So the other kids don't know that they're not in there, but they never get called on, and they know they're not in there. So they know they can relax. Because if you think about it, whenever everybody, I don't think we talked about this earlier, but whenever everybody else was reading, and you guys who had the altered piece, were you able to focus on what they were reading? No, because what were you doing?
Trying to read ahead.
Trying to read ahead and see if you could figure it out. So did you learn anything from any of that? Nope, and neither are these kids. They're so worried about what's coming next, what do I have to read, not looking stupid, that they get nothing out of it, where listening is their best way to learn. So if you tell them, I'm not going to call on you to read, they can relax, and they can take a deep breath, and they can listen to what all the other kids who are good readers are reading, and they actually learn something from listening to that material instead of being so worried about when they're going to have to read. They can listen to the story and actually get a chance to understand it because they are not in fear the whole time that they are going to be called on. So for testing, oral testing is actually preferred so that they can really show you that they know the information without reading, writing, and spelling getting in the way. If they must absolutely take a written test, they will need a shorter test or extended time because they read and write more slowly. Extended time should be outside of the general classroom unless all the students are given extra time because, having Johnny go to the back of the room and finish his test while everybody else is doing whatever activity they're doing next is, one, emotionally traumatizing to Johnny, and two, he can't focus because all the other kids are doing something else that he really would rather be doing than taking this test. Provide a study guide or sample test ahead of time, do an in-class review session, avoid multiple choice questions actually. The difference between the right and wrong answer is often very subtle, and if they misread the question even a little, they may choose the wrong answer even though they know the material. So it's better to ask two choice questions, just give them two choices and one they have to circle where the words are already there, or instead of open-ended questions and also instead of multiple choice questions. Fill in the blank tests are really hard for these kids because they actually have to pull those words out. It's really tough for these kids to get things into their long-term memory. They actually need much, much more repetition than a typical student. So this typical student over here, it might take them 10 repetitions to learn that material. It's going to take this kid with dyslexia 100. And we don't have that time in school, right? We got to move on. We can't spend all that time. We got tests to get to and curriculum to pass. And so they get left behind. And it's really hard for them to pull, once they do get that in there, let's say they have their 100 repetitions, they got it in there, they know it, it's hard for them to get it back out. It's like they got a bunch of very disorganized filing cabinets in their brain that probably look like my filing cabinets at home, and they can't find anything. They can't get it back out. It's in there, but they can't get it out. And so coming up with a word on the spot like that, an open-ended question, is really hard for them. Not only do they have to retrieve the word, but they have to spell it. And so word bank actually gives them what they need to have a chance of doing well on the test. So giving them the open-ended with the word bank is the best way to go. Frequent small quizzes are better than giving only a midterm and final exam. Again, the more information they have to, did I not get it? Sorry.
One more.
Okay. Just holler at me because I'm watching this. So the more information that they have to remember, obviously, the harder it's going to be. So the smaller amount of information you can give them for a quiz, like, okay, we're just going to take a 10-question quiz every week instead of having a big old final at the end of 5 weeks or whatever. Avoid essay questions or accept very brief answers like bullet points. Don't count off for spelling, grammar, or handwriting. We talked about how that they work so hard just to keep the content in their brain. They cannot, there's no room left for mechanics. They just can't remember those rules. So if you count off for that, their content may be good, they may know the answers, but then you're counting off for punctuation, grammar, and spelling, and they get an F anyway. When if you wouldn't have done that, maybe they'd get an A or a B. Leave plenty of space for written answers. Students with dysgraphia often write with very large letters. Minimize the need for handwriting. So if you do like a matching test, that's helpful because they don't have to write, and again, those words are already provided for them. Minimize the need for spelling. Print a list of possible answers on the test. The student must recognize the right answer, but he no longer has to remember how to spell it. And also adopt a no-fail policy. Allow students to retake an exam after additional study, or even better, design another type of assignment that they'll be good at, like for extra credit or however you want to do it. That requires comparable work, but in a different format, like a video, or maybe they're good at storytelling or whatever my daughter writes songs, so maybe she could write a song, something so that they can show you they know the material in a format that they're successful at and that they feel good about, instead of, oh, I just failed another test. Try to avoid asking students to remember a lot of random facts for the test. Rote random facts are difficult for students with dyslexia to retain. Plus, memorizing all those facts that they can just Google anytime they want is not really purposeful in today's society. Many students with dyslexia actually love history, but they have trouble memorizing all the rote random facts. They can usually tell you the story though, so if you're teaching history and you want them to show you what they've learned, ask them to tell you the story about Christopher Columbus. They can probably tell you, and they can tell you lots of details about it, and they know the story, but having to remember that he sailed the ocean blue in 1492 or whatever is hard for these kids. Now I will say the rhymes and the songs and those kinds of things do help them remember. So the more of that you can do, putting motions to it, again, multisensory. Always be thinking multisensory. We can do motions, we can do a song, we can do a story, we can do a rhyme. And the more ways that you can get this information into different methods is great. But they usually are good at telling the story and what impact it had, which is really why we teach history anyway. Research has shown that all students learn best by being allowed to bring one sheet of paper into the test with whatever notes they want written on the front and back. Preparing the sheet of notes from all of their material helps everyone learn it better, and then students with dyslexia don't have to rely on their memory. This also helps decrease their test anxiety, and they do much better on the test. So there's a whole lot of benefits to allowing them to prepare something that they bring in, whether they have to type it or handwrite it or whatever's best for them. To have that to lower the test anxiety. Then they don't have to have all those really important things in their brain. They can remember some of the other things, maybe, that might be on the test. All right, so audiobooks. Children with dyslexia should have audio versions of all text. So Bookshare and Learning Ally are the two national databases. Oh, sorry. Nope, that's not it anyway. Oh, I went back. I'm terrible with technology. Okay. So the two national databases for audiobooks are Bookshare and Learning Ally. Bookshare is actually free to all K-12 students in the United States who have a print disability. So there are school memberships to these. I don't know if any of you guys have any of those. I don't know how much the school memberships cost. However, each individual student can get their own account after they've been identified as having what they call a print disability. So, like when I test a student, then I always tell the parents to fill out the form and send it to me, and I sign it to say they have a print disability, and then they're able to get free access to Bookshare, which has thousands and thousands of audiobooks. They have to sign, I always tell them, you have to sign your life away because it's copyrighted material, so you have to promise not to give their username or password to anybody else. But these databases even have a lot of the school textbooks in them, so they're really nice. But again, you either have to have a school membership where you can kind of give out the usernames or passwords, or they're going to have to be identified by someone who signs that paper and says, yes, they have this, by a professional who they deem credible to do that. But those are really helpful. Most computers, tablets, and smartphones have free screen reader software already installed. I forgot to tell you. So Bookshare, it's free, but the downside to Bookshare is that it's all computer read. So some of the kids love hearing the computer voice, some of them hate it. So I always tell parents to try it first because it's free. And then if they hate the computer voice, then they can get Learning Ally, which is about $130 a year, but it's all human read. Once they have a membership to Bookshare, that can just be sent over to Learning Ally, and they'll get a membership there, but they have to pay the fee, obviously. But there are free screen reader software on a lot of computers, tablets, phones. Again, it's computer read, but that's something to play around with too, something you can use in your classroom. You can scan something in and have it read it, or it can read a website or whatever. There's a C-Reader pen that was actually created by a teenager with dyslexia. It's pricey, it's $300 to $350, somewhere in there. But it actually, when you put it over the text, it reads it. There's a little computer in it, and they can have a little earbud in, and so nobody really knows what they're doing. It just kind of looks like they're highlighting, but they're actually listening to what the little computer is reading. And of course, alternatively to all of that, all text can be read to the child. There's a couple of programs we'll talk about a little bit later that parents can get that are really affordable too, that do great things like this. Children with dyslexia should listen to text that is at a level they can understand, not the level they can read with their eyes. So like I said, if they're in 3rd grade and they're only a 1st grade reader, we don't want to give them 1st grade material. We want to give them 3rd grade material that they're listening to with their ears instead of reading with their eyes, because they need that knowledge base. They need that vocabulary. So this may be the grade level they are in, or even above that grade level. It's important to build their knowledge base and vocabulary. They need access to the same information as their peers, not just information that is at the level they can read with their eyes. The OG tutoring will improve their reading, so they won't need to rely on audiobooks as much later, but it's important they have access to the same curriculum as their peers until their reading is up to grade level. For spelling, so the traditional way of teaching spelling has never worked to teach students with dyslexia, and it never will. Even if they work hours and hours to get a good grade on their spelling test, they will not retain the words for later use. So basically what these kids do is spend hours and hours every week memorizing their 10 or 20 spelling words. They might do okay on the test on Friday. Some of them might even get an A on it. So you're like, oh, they're good spellers. They got an A on their test. I bet if you ask them to spell that word next week, they can't do it. And that's the problem. Why are we making them spend hours and hours learning these words that next week they can't spell anymore? I mean, what's the point? I'd much rather them be spending quality time with their families than crying and screaming about spelling words every night, which is what happens to these poor parents. Because it's hard, and they don't want to do it, and they know that it's pointless, and so they fight, and I honestly don't blame them. So working on spelling the traditional ways wasted time when they could be having OG tutoring or doing something in their gifted areas or just having fun. Spelling tests, so what we recommend is that spelling tests should not be graded. They should take the test with the other kids so they don't look different, but they know it's not graded. If they're getting Orton Gillingham-based tutoring, then you could accept work from their OG tutor for their spelling grade. The Barton system that we use actually has spelling words with each level so that we can send that they already know how to sound out, because we've taught them how to do that. And of course it starts out really basic with, you know, the consonant, vowel, consonant words with all short vowels, but it quickly moves up into the higher level words, and they take those tests and they don't even have to study those words because they already know how to sound them out. Also don't ask them to look things up in a printed dictionary. Have them Google words that they need to know how to spell. Spell check is usually not a great option because it gives you a bunch of words and they're all really similar. So how in the world am I supposed to figure out which one of these is right? If you Google it, then you get a picture and more context and that kind of thing. So that's really a better way for these kids to do it now that we have all this great technology. Don't count off for spelling mistakes. Grade their papers on content only. Ignore spelling, punctuation, capitalization. No bleeding papers, like we talked about earlier. Writing in red on top of their misspelled words does not teach them how to spell. It teaches them how to be ashamed of their writing and will make them not want to write anymore. So that's what we're doing to our kids, is making them not want to read and not want to write. Which is the opposite of what we want to do, which is inspire them, right? So there is an option that can be helpful with this. It's called the underlining option. Tell the students to use the vocabulary they want when they're writing, but underline any words they know or suspect are misspelled. And don't count off for those words because they already know they can't spell it, so they underline it. So you know they can't spell it, so you don't count it off. Students will produce better quality work, and teachers will see the students' true intellectual capability when they are not worried about their spelling. So for handwriting, students who have dyslexia and or dysgraphia should not be made to copy from the board or from a book or paper. Copying is tedious and torturous for them, and they don't learn anything by copying. As I said earlier, you're looking up and down, you're getting one letter at a time. I have no idea what I'm even writing. So how in the world are they learning from that? So we recommend that they can take a picture of what's on the board if there's something that they need nowadays. So many of these kids, the older ones, have phones and tablets, and a lot of the younger ones, even in schools, have tablets now. Or write it down for them, or have a friend write it down. Students with dyslexia also should not be made to take notes. They can't listen to you if they're trying to write down what you say. No learning will take place if they are trying to take notes. And so if you think about it, like the lady in the processing thing earlier, you're trying to listen, and the best we learn, especially these kids learn the best by listening. So I'm trying to listen to what she's saying. Okay, now I gotta write this down. Oh no, now I missed half of what she said. Okay, I'm gonna write this down. Oh, I don't know where she is again. And so, they're missing half of what you say, and they're trying to write down about half of what you say, and then they go home, and they either can't even read their own handwriting, or they have no idea what it meant, and so, well, forget that, So basically, what do they have to study for their test? Whatever they heard, which was only half of it, which means they're gonna get an F. I mean, that's kind of what happens when these kids try to take notes, and so we try to help them with this by ideally having some type of software. So there's a LiveScribe pen, and there's some software on the tablets. OneNote, Otter Voice Notes is another one. I thought I put that in here, but looks like I didn't. What's that? Oh, it is, okay. It looks like this maybe didn't update when I updated the handout. Interesting. So what these do is they record the lecture, and then they can write a word or draw a picture. Like if they're talking about the stars and the moon, well, okay, this is the part about the stars, so I'm gonna put a star, and then this is the part about the moon, so I'm gonna draw a moon. And then when I get home, I can click on the star, I can click on the moon, and it tells me back that part of the lecture. So whatever it is that they need more time with, that they need to hear again, they're gonna hear over without having to listen. Like if you just take a recorder to class, you're gonna get the whole lecture, and you go home and you gotta listen to the whole thing, right? This way, they can pick and choose what they need to listen to again, what they need help with. But if that's not possible, they should at least be given a copy of the teacher's notes ahead of time, or have a friend take notes for them, because taking notes for these kids is really difficult. Students with dyslexia should be allowed to take a picture of the notes on the board or be given a copy of them ahead of time. I talked about that a little bit. So children with dysgraphia should not be given handwriting grades. Points should never be counted off for sloppy handwriting, because they honestly just can't help it. I actually, when I was in elementary school, I'm sure I have some dysgraphia to go along with my ADD, but my elementary school, the only thing I ever got C's in was handwriting. And I literally could not do it any better. I tried my hardest, and I would take a long time, and it was still not good. And I remember my 5th grade teacher, we had to write these book reports on those note cards, the like 5x8 or whatever note cards. Those little lines were so small, I couldn't write on those little lines. It was awful. So I would do the very best I could, and I knew the book report was really good, because I was really good at book reports. But I'd get counted off for my handwriting every single time, and she finally told, and I love this teacher, but she finally told me, if that's not better next time, you're getting an F. That's not fair when it's an excellent book report, but you're gonna give me an F because my handwriting, and I literally cannot make it any better. What am I supposed to do? I can't change my hand and the way it functions any more than you can change your eyes that you need glasses. I mean, I just can't do it. So, that's definitely something, experiences. I was telling some of the gals at lunch, I've always been really good at school, but God definitely gave me some of these experiences along the way that make me feel, like I know how these kids feel, and then my own kids have helped me with that. But so there is a program called Handwriting Without Tears that can help them improve their handwriting in the younger grades, but I will tell you it's not without tears. It's hard for these kids to improve their handwriting. Usually by 3rd grade, it's about as good as it's going to get. So in order to bypass the dysgraphia, what we recommend is teaching them to type, first and foremost. This is not easy for these kids either, because again, it's random sequences, right? They have to learn all these little sequences on the keyboard to touch type. But there are a lot of, and I've got them listed on here, a lot of games online that they can play where they shoot the aliens and whatever, so they think it's fun, but they're learning how to type. So I always tell parents, you know, if they want to be on the computer, but you don't really want them playing a video game, go put them on typing club. Because the more they practice that, the better. These kids have got to be able to type, because what do we do after we get older now? When do we ever handwrite? You know, we might write ourselves a note. There's just not a whole lot of times that we handwrite anymore. So if they can type, they're going to be functional. And, you know, let the handwriting be whatever the handwriting is going to be. I usually tell parents, if it's important to you and it's important to the kid, and they're below third grade or below, then go ahead and work on it. But to me, it's just so much more functional to type. And the other thing that can be helpful is text-to-speech or speech-to-text software. And there are free ones, again, on the computers. They're not super good. They're not very good at like learning your speech patterns, but you can try them. They're good to play around with. Dragon Dictation is actually the best. Dragon Naturally Speaking is what it's called now. It's actually the best, really the best software program out there for that. It learns your speech patterns way better than anything else. Now, we have another issue with some of these kids who have articulation problems, because then text-to-speech software isn't really an option either. And many of these kids have articulation problems, and some of them very severe. And so, you know, it's like, what do you do? Typing is usually the best, but again, they're not super good at that either. Those kids usually maybe have some apraxia going on, where, you know, the message from the brain to the mouth isn't quite intact. And so the message from the brain to the fingers a lot of times isn't quite intact either. And so, you know, these kids unfortunately have a lot of challenges to overcome. That speech to text, we talked about speech to text software, okay. Let me get a drink here. So, I talked a little bit earlier about dyscalculia. So dyscalculia is actually, if you haven't heard of it before, is actually, dyslexia and dyscalculia can appear together. Dyscalculia has to do with math. Dyslexia by itself, pure dyslexia, typically affects math, even if they don't have the dyscalculia, but the dyscalculia actually causes difficulty with concepts. So kids with only pure dyslexia who don't have dyscalculia usually are really good at math. They get numbers, they love numbers, that's all they want to do is math. But they do have some struggles in math, because one of the things they're really bad at is random facts. So memorizing those math facts is the bane of their existence. And they cannot get them, and it doesn't matter what they do. So there's that problem. Then obviously when it comes to story problems, they're having difficulty even figuring out what the story problem says. And so, you know, then they have trouble figuring out how to set it up, because it's a reading issue that interferes there, but usually they're really good at the math concepts. They also can have trouble copying their numbers over. They might reverse numbers. They have trouble lining things up. They might start on the wrong side of the math problem. So those are things you'll see with kids with pure dyslexia. If they also have dyscalculia, or if they have dyscalculia, you can have one or the other or both. If they have dyscalculia, then they have difficulty with math concepts. So these are the kids who math just does not make sense to them. So there's some different things that we can do to help these kids with math as well. Students with dyslexia have a difficult time remembering random facts and sequences, so memorizing math facts is very difficult. Avoid time tests for math facts, because of course when you're timed, there comes that anxiety. And even if they know those facts, they're not going to be able to put them on that page, very many of them. But if you give them enough time, a lot of times they can get a lot of them done. Allow students with dyslexia to use calculators on assignments and tests. I know that, you know, oh no, they're not going to learn their math. They are. They can. I've got an adult right now who's been through tons of math programs that have never worked, and she's finally getting it. And we didn't use a calculator all the way up until we went through long division, I think. But after that, we had to, because we got to the fractions and all the finding common factors, and she knows the math facts because we did this special program to teach them to her, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute, but she lost them all. When we got to those more complex things, she's trying to figure out all of these steps, she loses her math facts. They are gone. But she knows how to do the problem, but then she gets it wrong, she doesn't know the math fact. So if you give them that calculator, then the math fact problem doesn't interfere, and they know how to do the problem, then they'll do it, and they'll do well. Yeah.
How early should we allow them to use a calculator?
Well, again, this is, it's going to be based on your individual student, but for sure, when you start seeing them struggle, I mean, I would let them start using it, honestly, because it's going to lessen the anxiety. For sure, by then, I would let them use it. Yeah, because by then you're doing a lot more complex math. But I'm going to tell you how to fix the math fact problem here in a minute. So that helps, but again, then once they get to these higher level, more complex problems, even though she knows those math facts, she loses them, they're gone. So do not require them to show their work, and again, I know this is difficult, but a lot of times these kids, especially the ones that have pure dyslexia, they'll just figure it out in their head, and they'll just tell you the answer. So if you could even do it orally, so that they're not cheating, but okay, what's this problem, what's this problem, what's this problem, and they can just spit out the answer, then let them do that, because showing that work is going to make them make mistakes, where, oh, well, the answer is 523, but when I showed my work, I got 510, what did I do wrong? But they knew the answer in the beginning. So again, you have to base this on individual students. These are just kind of general recommendations, but and also don't force them to rewrite their answers on an answer sheet. They'll make errors in copying. Instead, have them circle or highlight their answer, or if you must have it on another answer sheet, just have somebody else copy it. So math facts. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with touch math. But we recommend that for addition and subtraction, which is where there's the dots on the numbers. So if you have so if you have 9 minus 4, and you start at 9, they learn where the pattern of the dots is, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, and that's their answer. It decreases this counting on their fingers, which for a lot of the kids, they hide it really well. But they do it, or they, nod their head, or they tap their foot, but this way, it's a very visual, multisensory kind of thing that they're doing, and it's more functional and doesn't look so, odd. Multiplication and division facts, though, have been really difficult because, I didn't change that, did I? Oh, no, I didn't. You just have to memorize multiplication and division facts. There's really no other option, and these kids are really bad at it. There's this program called Times Tales, and Susan Barton actually said, I didn't have anything to recommend for multiplication and division until a homeschooling parent, they created this program, and she said, this works. It works. It's amazing. And you can get a DVD for $13 at timestales.com. Now, I don't know how much a school site license is. You'd have to look into that, but and then when you get the DVD, it says you can't use it for more than 5 students at a time or something. I don't know. You guys have small classes though, so that could work. But what it does is it actually takes the numbers and makes them these characters and puts it into stories. And so it's a little cartoon, and so the 8 is Mrs. Snowman, and the 7 is Mrs. Week, and so the 6 is the 6th grade class, and they all have the 6 on their head, and then the 4 is a chair, so that looks like a chair. And so then the story is the 6th grade class played musical chairs for 24 hours. So they remember the story, and they have their math facts. And the visual, they're going through later, and you can see the wheels, and they're like, oh yeah, Mrs. Snowman and Mrs. Week, and they just go through the little stories in their head, and it works. It's 2 half-hour videos, and then with some practice with it, and you can do it as many times as you need to. Have the easier math facts first, and then the harder ones. So I highly recommend that if you're having kids that are having trouble with their math facts. But again, even with that, they're probably still going to need a calculator for that higher level math, because those math facts will not stay in their head when they're trying to do multi-step problems. If they have difficulty lining up the numbers when handwriting, there's a free app called Mod Math. It uses the on-screen keyboard to set up the problem and solve it, print it out, or email it to the teacher. Of course, you guys already know the low tech, turn your paper sideways, use graph paper, those kinds of things can be helpful as well to line things up. For multi-step math problems that are difficult to remember all the sequence of steps involved, PhotoMath is a good app to help them learn how to solve the problem and make sure it's correct. And it helps parents learn how to do the problems as well. I can't tell you how many times I've used that helping my kids. So you take a picture of the problem. Now, can they use this to cheat? Sure they can, but hopefully the trust relationship is there and that, the parents are helping. I know you don't always get that, but again, sometimes these kids just need to get done with their math too. And I've had many nights with my kids, we've been hours and we're crying and pulling our hair out and it's just like, I'm done, and they can't figure it out. I'm not explaining it in a way that they understand it. They're screaming at me, I'm yelling at them, It makes for a horrible tension in the house and a horrible night whenever you just want to relax and have fun with your family. And so sometimes something like that is extremely helpful. Okay, I'm going to use PhotoMath and I'm going to show you how to do it, and we got it. So math programs that have been recommended by homeschoolers for children with math problems related to dyslexia. I have not used any of these except Matthew C. Matthew C is a really good one. But basically, we have to go all the way back to the beginning with a lot of these kids again. So there's an assessment that we figure out kind of where they need to start. But a lot of them, if they don't have their math facts down, we got to go all the way back to addition and subtraction, and it feels like kindergarten, just like it does when we go all the way back to the sounds for the reading, but we absolutely have to fill in the holes in their learning. They didn't get it all the first time because they weren't taught in the correct way, and they weren't given enough time to process, and they weren't given enough repetition, so we have to go back. Otherwise, they're not going to get it. And it does work, but it takes time. It takes a lot of hard work. But the funny thing is, that you think that these kids, I didn't switch the thing, sorry. You'd think that these kids would be like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this, and some of them do. But interestingly enough, once they start it, and even the older kids, even the high schoolers, they realize how much it's helping them. You see a total change in their self-esteem, a total change in their confidence. It's amazing. Even though they're coming in and you feel like, oh, this is kindergarten again today, sorry, but it changes their whole outlook, and they are willing to try. My husband actually teaches at my daughter's school, and we had a high schooler there that we were tutoring, and he told me that before we started tutoring him, he was a junior, I believe, when we started. He wouldn't do his homework because he'd given up because it was too hard, and he couldn't do it well, and so he wouldn't turn stuff in half the time, and he said he always came in and he just always looked down, and he was frowning, and he was sad, and just almost, looked depressed. And a week after we started tutoring, my husband came home and said, he's a different kid. He came in, he's smiling, he's engaged in the classroom, he turned in his assignment, it's amazing because we gave him hope. And then what happened was the state was saying that they had to pass ISTEP to graduate. He couldn't graduate because he hadn't passed his ISTEP test. And unfortunately, the school was not saying you can get a waiver for that. Because they wanted to motivate him to pass it. He's not going to pass it. But that was their thought, was let's motivate him to pass it. So his mom contacted me and said, oh my gosh, he was on the honor roll. After he started tutoring with us, he was on the honor roll, and now he's getting B's and F's again. I don't know what happened. And I said, I know what happened. They told him he can't graduate if he can't pass that test, and he knows he can't pass that test, so he gave up. They took away his hope. And so I sat him down and I said, look, there's a waiver process. Here it is. You meet all the qualifications. You're going to graduate. It doesn't matter if you pass that test or not. He went back up to getting all A's and B's again. It's proof. It's proof positive that these kids need hope and they need to feel successful. And what we're doing as an educational system is the exact opposite of that. Anyway, okay. Sorry, I get on my soapbox there. Okay. So for homework, students with dyslexia should be given only homework they can do independently. Homework should be reduced with feedback from parent until the dyslexic child is spending no more than 1.5 the amount of time as a student without dyslexia would spend on the same assignment. So if you say this homework's going to take an hour, then the child with dyslexia should spend an hour and a half on it. And that's I always tell parents, you work it out with the teacher and then you sign off and you say, we spend an hour and a half, we're done, I'm sending it back in, the teacher knows you gave too much homework. If it takes longer than that, the parent should have the right to stop and sign off on it. It should still count for full credit. Again, this is the recommendation. The other thing, as I say, they need to be able to do it independently because these poor parents, the ones that can, there are many of these parents who also have dyslexia who are not capable of helping their kids, and those are the ones that, you know, we're always like, oh gosh, they don't care. They do. I mean, what parent doesn't care about their kid, right? They care. They're just not capable. And they don't want to admit that they're not capable, so they make it look like they're lazy, just like they did when they were in school. You know, it looks like they're lazy because they don't want to admit that they can't. And so, but a lot of these parents can't help their kids. The ones that can end up spending hours and hours and tears and fighting and begging and pleading and tantrums, and I mean, it's just awful. Just creates every night is a battle. Every night is a battle. I've been there with some of that with my own kids, and it's awful. So when we say that only homework they can do independently, we need them to be able to do things on their own. We need their parents not to have to sit next to them for hours every night because, you know, they have other things they have to do. Plus, we want that kid to feel successful and feel like he can do something on his own. So to try to, you know, make the homework, modify the homework somehow so that you know that student can do it by themselves with maybe, you know, a little bit of guidance, a little bit of supervision, but not that parent sitting there right beside them the whole time. You do have to read things to them and that kind of thing, but that they don't have to be right there the whole time. Disorganization is also a part of dyslexia and ADD. It's important to develop routines for how homework is assigned and turned in. Make sure the parent has a way to check on what's been assigned without having to rely on their child copying assignments down or remembering them. Nowadays we have so many, you know, things computerized that they can just look on their dashboard or whatever and find it. So that's really handy. Parents should be notified as soon as possible of assignments not turned in. Long-term assignments should be broken into smaller sections for these students. A good strategy is to have 2 colors of envelopes, like a green one for what the parent needs to see that night, a red one to send homework back to school in each day. So, once it's agreed upon that you're only sending work the child can do independently, the parent should not step in and do the work if the child can't do it. Because a lot of times, when we're sending this work home and these kids can't do it, the parents are doing it. You know, we can't pretend that we don't know that. You know, it's either terrible or the parents did it. And so, and what are they learning from that? But you know, they need to feel successful. So I've done it. I've done my kids' math before. You know, I mean, it's just because I was done. You got to get some sleep. It's been a terrible night. Go to bed. You know, I've done it. And so, what did she learn from that? Absolutely nothing. So, you know, we want to send them things that they can do on their own that the parent doesn't have to do. There's the homework reminder app that's free for teachers. If you guys don't know about it, you probably do, but remind.com, so it's pretty cool. And then just another statement about this. Dyslexia can rob a child of their childhood. They do hours of homework each night and maybe have to stay up really late to get it all done. Between tutoring and homework and school, where their recesses often get taken away to finish work they didn't get done the night before, they have no time left to just be a kid. And this just breaks my heart, working in the schools and seeing all these kids who have to stay in at recess because they didn't get their morning work done or they didn't get their homework done. And it's every single day. Again, a lot of the kids on my speech caseload, where are they? Whenever, you know, recess is over and I need them for speech, they're in their classroom and they've been there the whole time. Every single day, because they didn't get their homework done. And it takes these kids 3 to 5 times longer to do anything. So how often do they stay in for recess? All the time. Do they need that break to get outside and run their energy off? Yes, they do. Those kids more than any other kid, because their brains are so full and they are so exhausted, they have got to have a break. But what do? We just hear more work, more work, more work, which makes their brains function at lower and lower and lower capacities. And then, again, we're forcing them to fail with all of these things that we think we're doing to help them. We're actually harming them. Oh, wait. Goodness, I'm going the wrong way. All right, so, and again, parents should not do the homework for the child. Parents should set up the homework schedule, set up homework location in a quiet, distraction-free area, initiate homework time, and supervise. If needed, they should read all text to the child, act as a scribe, and write down exactly what the child says. Don't make them copy it down in their own handwriting. This doesn't help them learn and is very tedious for them. So this is one thing, again, that you guys can work out with parents, but that the child would tell the parent what to write. The parent's going to write exactly what they say, so you know it's the kids. I mean, if the parent writes it, you can usually tell by the way they phrase it and what the answer says. And so hopefully the parent will write exactly what the kid says, so you know it's their words. But if we force that child to then go and copy down what they wrote, imagine how hard that is, and they learn nothing from it, and then it makes them not want to do their homework anymore. Again, parents should act as a timekeeper and sign off on the homework if it's too long or the child can't do the work independently. An extra set of textbooks at home is helpful. Of course, now we're going to all these online textbooks, which they'll have access to, you know, whatever works. And again, it might be in Bookshare or Learning Ally, and parents should help their child organize the backpack because it's usually a mess. Dyslexic children should never have to participate in spelling bee. This actually teaches them to be ashamed that they can't spell. It's better to give the class a choice. Would you like to do the spelling bee or practice your spelling in your notebook? That kind of practice usually won't improve these kids' spelling, but at least it's private and none of the other kids will see or hear their spelling errors. So they'll a lot of times choose to do that instead. Never make them read aloud in class when they didn't volunteer. Never make them write on the board. Pass their papers down the row. Have their paper graded by another student. Be called on to answer questions when they didn't volunteer, or get a failing grade when it is evident they are trying. So again, allow them to retake an exam or give them an additional extra credit project that's in a different format that can help them boost their grade up. One of the things a lot of times, again, well-meaning, but we end up setting these kids up for bullying because we're the ones that send the papers down the row with all the red marks on it. We're the ones that make the smart kid grade this kid's paper, not that this kid's not smart, but you know what I mean. You know, we're the ones that show their weaknesses to all the other kids, and then those kids, you know, oh, well, you must be stupid, you must be dumb. And so unknowingly, we're actually setting them up for that. So we have to change that. So what does fear have to do with it? Everything. Children with dyslexia learn in the early grades that they can't do things that come easily to other kids. It doesn't matter how hard they try, they can't read, write, and spell like the other kids, and this is humiliating for them. And even the ones who only have the math. My daughter, I was telling them at lunch, she's a straight A student in everything else but math, but she'll fail a math test and come home and say, I'm stupid, I'm a loser, just because of math. I'm like, oh my gosh, you have straight A's, you have a 3.9 GPA, how could you be stupid? But she still feels that. She still feels like that. So they know that they can't read, write, and spell like the other kids, and this is humiliating for them. School becomes torture they must endure every single day. By third grade, if not sooner, they hate their brains and they hate school. They are so afraid of public humiliation in front of their friends, and it happens to them every day. Students simply can't learn when they're afraid. Without even knowing it, that's what I was just talking about, the teacher can actually set them up for teasing and bullying by revealing their weaknesses to peers. All of this leads to depression and anxiety and more school failure. So having at least one adult who always supports and believes in them can make the difference between success or failure in adult life. That was a research study. Another part of the research says that, one of the biggest factors that we can tell is that a kid's going to be successful in the future is that they have grit. The funny thing about that is that these are the kids who get that grit, because these are the kids who get knocked down and have to pick themselves back up every single day. And so if we support them, if we help them, they can be hugely successful. Just like I said, 35% of entrepreneurs are dyslexic, but only 20% of the population, only 1% of middle management has dyslexia. So it shows you where those skills are, and they're amazing, but we're not helping these kids live up to their potential with the way that we teach them. So feeling successful is important. Success feeds motivation. As long as there's a chance the child will succeed, he will work 5 times harder than everyone else does. But when accommodations are refused, he feels like there is no way to succeed and he will give up. Then he gets called unmotivated and lazy, but they would rather be called lazy than stupid. We talked about that earlier. Children with dyslexia are the farthest thing from lazy. They have to work 3 to 5 times harder than anyone else just to do average work. And, you know, I was part of this too when I worked in the schools, like, oh yeah, that kid must just be lazy. But now, I think no kid's lazy, because when you watch those little kindergartners come in, they got their little backpacks on, they're excited to be there, they want to learn. You don't ever see one of them coming in like this the first day of school. You know, oh my gosh, you don't want to go to school. They're all excited, right? They want to learn. They don't give up and quit until they figure out they can't. So, all right, so what if a teacher says it's not fair? Hopefully this is none of you, but there are some teachers who think accommodations give students an unfair advantage. In actuality, accommodations merely level the playing field for students who learn differently. So wearing glasses is actually an accommodation. If you don't allow students to wear their glasses, they can't see and they will do poorly. Again, if you took my glasses away, I wouldn't be able to read this. And so then you think that I was not super smart. But we can't motivate them or punish them or shame them into changing their eyeball shape. I mean, I can't change the way God made my eyeballs, right? Any more than these kids can change the way that God made their brain. So students who are allowed to wear their glasses then have an equal chance to do as well as those who don't need glasses. So would we ever take a kid's glasses away? Oh my gosh, no, you would never do that, right? But by not providing accommodations to these kids who have dyslexia, it's the same thing. You took their glasses away. They can't function. So accommodations like having test questions read to them gives children with dyslexia a chance to do well. Refusing to allow the accommodations will force failure on a child who could possibly succeed. And we do this all the time. We force failure on these kids because we're not giving them the right type of instruction. We're not giving them the right kind of accommodations so that they can be successful. So, ideally, once you get a professional report indicating dyslexia, the school would write formal accommodations in a 504 plan or an IEP or an ISP. Once they have that formal plan, like I was telling you guys earlier, you can use they can use the accommodations on the high stakes testing, standardized testing, all of those things. They do have to be using those things in class for a few months before that testing occurs. But sometimes it's hard to get a formal plan from a private school perspective. From the public school, it's hard to get a formal plan. The parents have difficulty typically getting plans a lot of times. So, or if the parents can't afford a professional assessment, at least the teacher may be willing to do what you can in the classroom to help. And so, you know, I know all of you guys, I'm sure, will be willing to do this and to help these kids. The downside to that becomes, once you're giving them help, the public school is probably not going to test them because they're going to say they're not failing, but we don't want them to fail because then you got that emotional component that comes in. So again, it may have to be the parents have to get outside testing and you do a 504 plan or whatever can happen to get the kids what they need. But I do tell parents that, you know, if you can't get the help that you need from your teacher or your school, you know, you might consider a different class, you might consider a different school. Homeschooling can be an option as well until their reading skills come up to grade level, depending on the parents and whether they're, again, able and capable to do that. But it will take years of getting the right learning support and counseling to repair the emotional damage that will happen if the child continues to struggle and feel humiliated day in and day out at school. All right, so that is the end of that part of the presentation. I don't know what time we have to wrap up.
About 2:15.
Okay, so we got a little bit of time for questions. Anybody have anything you want to ask right now?
How is it determined the student with dyslexia versus ADD?
That's a tricky one. She said, how do we determine dyslexia versus ADD? So again, the public schools kind of want to throw everybody into that barrel of attention problems. So a lot of time, I mean, I'll just tell parents, okay, go, if the school wants you to go get ADHD testing, go get it done. Like, go to the doctor, your insurance, your health insurance will pay for that. So go to the doctor, go get ADHD testing. You know, if it comes back negative, then you've proven that that's not what it is. If it comes back positive, there still could be dyslexia there. But at least you have some kind of a diagnosis to give to the school to say, you know, we need accommodations for this diagnosis. Telling the difference can be difficult. even when I have kids that come to me for testing, you know, I can tell about the dyslexia part, and I can say, you know, they're pretty fidgety, or they were very easily distracted. You probably want to go get them checked for ADD or ADHD, but I mean, I can't diagnose that. But at school, it's really difficult to tell whether is it a behavior issue because they're struggling, or is it really an attention issue? And I mean, really the only way is to have them tested. So either the public schools, you know, they don't actually test for either one of these things, but they will, if they will test at all, they'll look for specific learning disability, and they'll comment on whether they think there could be some attention issues, but again, then the parents have to take them to the doctor. So really getting the diagnosis is about the only way, yeah.
So is halting like a side issue of?
Is what?
Halting. I have a child when he reads, halts about every couple of words. Is that an anxiety produced?
Probably, kind of like a stutter, is that what you mean, or?
Not a stutter, it's just as he's reading, he just pauses every couple of words, and I just wondered, but he's always eager to read. He's like, can I read, you know?
It's hard to say without actually seeing that kiddo, but I would guess that it could be anxiety, or it could be he's thinking about what's next, you know, like taking a pause to think, or it could just be a rhythmical pattern, you know, as he reads. I don't know. It'd be hard to say without actually hearing him do that, but. Anybody else?
Do you know of any people who test up in northern Indiana, like Burnport, Maine? And so if we had a family who, like, we have someone who's already gone through the full gamut of testing through the public school system, as you mentioned, and they put them in other. So, I mean, you're going through these slides, and I'm like, textbook, this is this child. I would love to recommend that family to go and get tested. But
and I don't think that there are any people that were trained, when I was trained, there's only a few in the state, up in that area. But yeah, I would say, again, I'm in Anderson, which is probably an hour and a half away, which if they're willing and able to do that is probably the closest that I know of in that area. But again, you know, there are resources out there that I'm not aware of. But for testing in particular, you know, I've had parents drive a couple hours to get testing, because we do one testing session and then we do a 2-hour meeting. So the testing session is usually 2 hours, and then the meeting. So yeah, I'm not sure, but I could look into that if, you know, if they're interested in that. And I also, a lot of places, there aren't very many places really that do any of this. So it is hard to find resources. And again, there may be things in your area that I don't know. I put some things up on the slide that I know about. But getting that diagnosis can be difficult. I actually also offer a screening for $60. That is just a brief time with the kids, and then I talk to the parents. It usually takes about an hour, just to give them a verbal indication of, you know, could this be dyslexia, so that they kind of have an idea before they move on to spend other money. Health insurance will actually, up to this point that I know of, they do not pay for anything with dyslexia. They consider it educational. And so, and I didn't really talk about this, I usually do. The school basically says, it's medical, go to the doctor. Well, doctors don't test for dyslexia, so they go to the doctor, and then the doctor says, go back to the school, and then the parents are stuck. Because the medical community, I think the doctors really feel like they know it's genetic, they know there's research behind this, they know that there's a neurological medical component to this, but they haven't been trained in it, they don't really know what to do. And then, you know, so they send them back to the schools, and the schools say, oh, it's medical, sorry, we can't test for that, we can't do anything about it. And so these parents are literally stuck. And health insurance typically won't pay for anything. Even if you go get like a full few $1,000 neurodevelopmental evaluation, it'll pay for the parts that are not related to dyslexia, but those health insurance companies consider dyslexia educational. And they will not pay for the treatment, or we call it tutoring, because again, it's educational, they will not pay for that. It's just, unfortunately, hard for the parents, especially the ones who don't have a lot of resources. But so anyway, I do offer that just to kind of give them an idea, and then I only charge $350 for my assessments, which again, I'm a speech pathologist, so I can't give IQ testing because I'm not a psychologist, and basically my report says they fit the profile of dyslexia. I do 10 to 12 tools, a couple of them standardized, lots of informal tools. But what we have had success with is then the parents give it to their doctor, and the doctors have been really good about taking my report and saying, you know, yes, here's a medical diagnosis, so that when they go to the school, then they have that. And then my report lists a lot of these things in it, so that they have all these accommodations, so that when after you as a teacher get that and say, oh great, this is what I can do this and this and this and this, it helps you write that 504 plan and all of that. So, but again, the resources are few and far between. And I've given you the ones that I kind of know about. It's definitely not an inclusive list, but someplace to start, so.
Once you do the screening, how do you know if the other testing is necessary or not?
So typically, when I do a screening, I usually talk to the parents first, and I ask them a lot of questions on the phone, and I have a pretty good idea that that's what's going on already. So then after I actually do the screening, then I can tell the parents, you know, yeah, I see signs of dyslexia, so yes, I would recommend further testing. Because I do that kind of phone screening first, I've only actually ever done a couple of screenings where it was kind of borderline where I wasn't sure after I actually saw the kid. But like I said, nothing else looks like dyslexia. The one kid that I did that with, the parents said, we think he might be autistic, you know, so there were some definitely complicating factors in there, and I said, you know what, I would go, because that takes, I can't test for that, so then you need to go see a neurodevelopmental pediatrician or whatever, you know, neurologist, wherever you're going to go for that testing to get that identified, but typically, like I said, I mean, nothing else looks like dyslexia, so I usually have a pretty good idea. Unless there's other complicating factors that have happened, medical issues, prematurity, or head injuries, or things like that can complicate things. As well as we were talking about the ELL kids, that you guys have so many of those. That also can complicate things as well, because, you know, is this reading difficulty because they're dyslexic or because they have English as a second language? Again, finding out how they do in Spanish or in whatever language it is helpful to know. You know, do they do okay in Spanish? It's probably an ELL thing. Are they struggling in Spanish too? It's very likely that it's, you know, dyslexia. Actually, 85% of learning disabilities the underlying cause is dyslexia. And there's so many more of these kids than dyslexia or dyscalculia. So there's so many more of these kids that have this, that we're not really addressing the underlying true cause of this. To really help these kids. So.
Have you seen any correlation in ethnicity? Are certain groups more prone to have this genetically?
No. It's basically 20% across the board. And again, that's kind of the highest percentage, and that's what the 40 years of National Institutes of Health, you will, if you go out and search online, you will see other websites that say it's 5 to 10% or 10 to 15%, or, you know, there's other schools of thought out there. But, you know, like I said, Susan Barton is the one I got all of my information from, and she uses that study, and it's 20%. Now that is kind of the highest number that's out there, but I believe it but again, some of these kids are so mild that you may never notice. You may never do anything about it. You know, they might be directionally impaired or something, but their reading, writing, spelling, they do fairly well. You may never notice. And then there's, you know, once they get a little bit worse than mild, then we usually start to notice some struggles. Even with my daughter, she struggled early on learning to read, but then she started memorizing all of her words, and she has this great visual memory, so she really has done well until she got into middle school. And then, you know, all of these big words come in, and, you know, we got where she's having trouble in science and social studies, and because she can't figure out all those words, and she can't remember them, and she can't memorize them. And so, or like she'll have trouble, like I said, with this multiple choice. So it'll say, you know, this is not this. Well, she didn't read the word not in there, because dyslexics typically skip words. Changes the whole meaning of the question. She knew the answer when I asked her. She knew it, but she didn't see not. I had her read it to me, and she totally skipped not. Well, no wonder you missed that. And so, you know, you'll start seeing, even in some of these milder kids, middle school, high school, you really can start seeing a lot of struggles where maybe before we didn't, and they can't organize. So, you know, like they got 7 different classes now. And so that really throws them for a loop sometimes, you know, to have all these different classes and different things they have to keep track of. So, you know, just even along the continuum, there's a whole lot of different things that can come up that you may not have realized before. So even if you've got a middle schooler or a high schooler, like, oh, well, they've done fine all along, but now, you know, they're really starting to struggle. It could very well be dyslexia. It's just it hadn't reared its head yet because they've been compensating all along. But as things get harder and more complex, you may see that come out. So
you said some of them can catch up, like in their grade levels. Is there something that kind of bridges that gap? Is it overcome, or how does that work?
So basically, if they are behind, really the only thing that can really get them caught up is intensive Orton-Gillingham-based tutoring. And it's usually one-on-one. Because if you think about it, these kids, you know, in the public schools, they do their reading intervention all in these little groups. Well, I'm horrified that I don't want these people to know that I can't do this. They're not going to show what they can do. They're not going to give their full effort if they're in a group with other kids. So that one-on-one is really important. Again, it's really hard to do in the schools, but it's really important for these kids. And so, again, having the family have the resources to be able to get the outside tutoring if it can't be provided at school. But a lot of these families don't, and that's what's really sad. So I'm hoping with the dyslexia law that a lot of this is going to start to change, but it's probably going to be years before we really see, you know, the full effect of it. But yes, if they're behind, they really have got to have some intensive intervention to catch up. Now, like I said, if we can catch them in kindergarten, first and second, and give them that Orton-Gillingham in the beginning, a lot of them won't need that. But once they're behind, we've got to do that intensive intervention to get them caught up. So, or else they're just going to continue to struggle. Anything else? All right, well, it looks like it's 2:15. Thank you guys all. You've been a wonderful audience. Thanks for having me. If you guys want to give me your papers, if you want a certificate or if you had any questions. Otherwise, you don't have to give it to me if you don't have either one of those needs, and I will get back to you by email. I also put my cards back on the table out there in the entryway, so if you guys feel free to take some of my business cards, and I'm happy, like I said, even if you live far away, you know, if parents are wanting someone to test, I'm happy to, you know, they can come and see me, I'm happy to do that. If you have a few in that area, I'm even willing to drive up there for a day, so. You know, just let me know. And so that green paper actually has my information on it as well, on the other side.
Yeah.
So, yep.
So even if he's in trouble with that per student still the price?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's $350 for the assessment per student, yeah. But like I said, I'd really want at least a couple. It depends how far it is I have to travel.
Do you know these grants maybe?
There used to be some things out there, but a lot of them aren't doing it anymore. I haven't really found anything new, but I always tell parents, go search, go look. I mean, you never know. And I always tell parents to ask like service clubs. So like Lions Club, Sertoma, Zi, all of those places, if they write letters to them and tell their story, a lot of times they can get $100 here, $100 there, you know, and they can get money to help out. And also GoFundMe and Generosity.com actually doesn't charge a fee. So that one's an even better one to use, but I always tell parents, we're also afraid to ask for help. But you know what? If you ask your friends and family and they know that it's really something that's really going to help your kid who has seriously been struggling, they're going to help you. You're going to get money. It's just we're all afraid to ask. You know, but don't be afraid to ask. Go out there and write letters to your family and say, hey, my kid really needs this and we can't afford it. Can you help us? They'll help you. People will help you if you reach out and ask for help. So, come on. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Did I get everybody's paper? Anybody else? Oh, you got one.
So obviously we don't all have access to Orton-Gillingham tutoring, but now you have some really good tools in your mind to identify students who are really struggling and to maybe make some recommendations to seek out some better assessments and diagnoses and some tutoring. And you also have some ideas for some accommodation. I heard some things from her that I've never heard before. some things, the ways to help these students cope in the classroom and be successful. And, you know, I don't know what you heard, but a lot of what I heard too had to do with how they feel about being in the classroom. And we know that their emotional state is really important to how well they accept any kind of learning, right? And we're seeing this huge rise in suicide rates and students just struggling with emotional and mental distress, and a lot of them are coming in already from stressful environments, and then they have to deal with that, you know? And oftentimes, let's just be honest here, a child who's really struggling with dyslexia or ADHD symptoms, oftentimes they're coming out of environments that are not helping that. Think about most students that you know that are really struggling, and how many of them have a really together household where the parents know exactly what to do with this child. And you know, usually school is their less crazy zone, you know, where they're more settled. So can you imagine what home must be like? And then we want them to learn. And so, you know, just prayerfully ask God to help you recognize things and be able to put things into use for these kids to help them. Thank you so much again, Susan. If you could, by the end of the day, make sure I get your expense reports, that would be great, because I can give them to Kyla tomorrow, and you might actually get this back on this paycheck. Otherwise, it'll wait another month, because we're right in that cycle point right now where she's gathering that stuff. So if you want it sooner than later, if you're a FTE, you drove, please get me that today. Our next section is going to be with Officer Jonathan. I don't see him yet. I told him 2:30, so take a break, stretch, get some water, and there's some desserts that Cross Street Christian brought that were left over from their Fall Fest yesterday out on the table. So we don't have any silverware or anything, so just go ahead and take a napkin and kind of scoop it out with a napkin or whatever you need to do. But I know Lisa does not really want to take them back with her, so please help her out.